Like you mentioned earlier, I'm not on social media. The reason I'm not on social media is that, like, to me, it takes away from my time, like actually having conversations with my kids and being present with them. And I remember this moment where I went like, I can't do this anymore. And then I did, because Rumi cried and I went and picked him up and I did what needed to be done. And I was like, oh, this is what is motherhood.
Advice to a mom who's nervous about giving birth. She's just like, I'm
But
pregnant.
Giving birth is the easy part.
Oh no.
It's true.
That is true. That is so true. Try breastfeeding and weaning and feeding
And not weaning.
sleeping and okay. Birth is easy. Meet the following years. I can't believe that it's finally happening because what is the time for you?
It's 10:43 p.m.
No, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We haven't spoken like this ever.
Yeah.
I was looking up our old conversations and trying to figure out, where will I even start to talk to you? And I found a 2011 notification where you added me on Google Plus Circles.
Oh my
Zoya,
God.
Zoya Brar added you to a circle. So I've known you for a very long time. And then I was going through emails, and then it came to an email you sent to me about buying a playpen, whether it's worth it or not. And it was very official and formal. Hi, Archil, how are you doing? I had a question. I was wondering if you could help me with that. And then from there to like getting me help for granulation tissue. So anyway, I am just glad that you're here to share information.
I don't know if I have any information to share, but
which I want people to hear. And I've also realized one thing by way of wanting to do this and figuring out a time to talk. The reason this information does not exist is because people like you and me don't have time. We don't have time to go on the internet and share that, oh, this happens, this is how you can tackle it, because you're busy, you're tired, I don't even know how many things you do. I don't know. The last time I checked, you had 5 jobs and 17 children and 45 things you were doing.
you're going to create scandal until 17 children.
Okay, two. Last I checked, 2 babies,
Still 2.
very, very cute ones, and 3 jobs. But I think a week or 2 ago, you were saying that you're thinking about changing that. But anyway, and of course, this is information about you that exists on the internet, that you founded a company, sold it, moved. I don't think that exists, that you moved. You're not very present on social media. So no, I don't think that exists. But this is what I asked Imran Khan. Who are you? So, so I genuinely can say all these things and introduce you, but I just know you as Zoya, mom to Rumi and Kabir, not Kabir and Rumi, who are 4.5 and almost 3. I can't believe it. Kabir
Crazy.
is almost 3. And forget style of parenting. The way you parent your babies with Lohit and with your mom, I think she plays an equal, if not, sometimes I feel like, just like if she wasn't there, much like I feel about my mom. Other than that, who's Zoya?
Other than that, right now, that is pretty much who's Zoya. But I think I've always been kind of a writer at the heart of arts, and that's something that keeps coming and going. So I'd say that's definitely part of who I am. There's this, I don't know if you've seen this movie called Spanglish.
No, I haven't.
Okay, so it's a beautiful one. You should watch it when you ever have time again. But essentially, in short, it's the line that really stayed with me from that movie was, "I'm my mother's daughter," and that's kind of defined her. And it's an application she's writing to Howard, and she describes her whole life. It's a really nice movie, but to me, that line felt like, okay, that's somebody could have written that about me. So I think that's a very big part of who I am.
When did Auntie have you? At what age?
She was 23. So young, but
Yeah,
not that young. But
yeah.
yeah, young.
23, young. I
I
mean,
mean, that Zaman.
I think my mom also had my sister at 23. And it was far easier birth. So you said rider. That's the other way that I connected with you. Again, the connection is it for to me, it's like souls. It's like I don't know what. I didn't have a moment's hesitation before I could say, Zoya, this is hard, this is happening, and I don't do that with everybody else or anybody else. I barely get to do it with Manan again time, but
Obviously.
I probably do it with you more because it's just easy and I'm like, okay, she's gonna get exactly what I'm saying. I read your series of posts about Rumi's birth, and I mean, there's actually I picked up a line from that I want to read, which I think it just takes you in. You want to read more, you want to know what happened, but it's so heartfelt, it's so beautiful. And you've not written about Kabir's birth. You haven't,
I
right? Or you haven't
I
posted it.
a
I don't
little
know.
bit. I think I wrote in the post I put about the end of year 2022. Kind of that was my post about him, but I
Hmm.
didn't really.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I didn't really call. Yeah, just
I
writing
often
is.
wonder if Samay and Kabir are going to be like, what, did you not feed it as much? Why didn't you
I
break it down?
mean, yeah, but also like Kabir's birth was just it just happened. It was great. Like there was no
Exactly.
trauma there. So
Exactly. But maybe that's why I also want you to talk about that. So I'm going to read this and then you tell me about giving birth to both Rumi and Kabir, the differences in everything, in the pregnancy, in how the birth happened, how you recovered, and how that shows up maybe today. Okay, but I'm going to first read this. They tell you over and over again about birth. Every birth is different. No one can really tell you how you will feel, how worse it can get, where we will end, etc. But who wants to believe that? Who wants to hear that no one seems to have a clue? So I kept pressing Sunny and Julian until Julian said, well, let's assume it will reach 10. And she was talking about the pain before your epidural. So tell me.
yeah, that seems like it doesn't sound like I wrote that at all. Like what?
You did. I was crying. I was crying reading the whole thing. It's too moving. I'm going to again link to that, but I want everybody to read how beautifully you captured how beautifully you brought Rumi into this world. But tell me more.
Yeah, no, I think there's a moment that not directly answering your question, I'll answer that too, but there was a moment in the hospital after Rumi was born when I was this was Rumi was in the NICU for 5 or 7 days after no 7 days after he was born, and I had a third degree tear and like was kind of attending to him without having I was not a patient, so I was middle of COVID, all kinds of restrictions, sleeping on this little sofa come bed with Lohit there. It was crazy. And I remember there was a moment where like I physically felt like I had reached my end of my limit. This was 4 days after I gave birth. So it wasn't, people think of birth as, you know this already, right? Like it's really giving birth is you get over it before. It's really painful, but it's over. Like you move on, right? But it's the after, which to me, that was the real like tough part. And I remember this moment where I went like, I can't do this anymore. And then I did because Rumi cried and I went and picked him up and I did what needed to be done. And I was like, oh, this is what is motherhood. Like you reach your real like real boundary and then you say no, I can do more than that. So to me, like Rumi's birth was really that, which is discovering that whatever imaginary kind of version of myself I had in my head, like, okay, this is what Zoya can do and this is what Zoya can't do, was only in my head. And when there was enough motivation or need to move beyond that, I could rise beyond what I had in my own mind thought of myself as. So to Kabir, I was already that mother who was very sure of herself, who was very clear that I could do it, that I mean, I feel like the whole imposter syndrome, like people talk about that in the context of business. I felt it in the context of motherhood. Like all the time, I was like, am I going to keep this thing alive? Like how? And because my mother was so involved, I was always like constantly thinking she has the answer, you know. And with Rumi, with Kabir, I I knew what I was doing, and I was just a very calm, confident mother. So yeah, and birth was completely different as well as a consequence. Like the choices I made, how I dealt with taking an epidural, not taking an epidural, or even like what I allowed for in the birth. Like it was dramatically different.
Was recovery easier second time around?
Yeah, like the best story I can tell you about that one is the day I gave birth. I gave birth at 7:50 something, 6:57 p.m.
Yeah.
on 2nd October.
Can never
And
forget, right? The exact time. Yeah.
and next morning at like, I don't know now, next morning, I'm pretty sure nobody remembers the time. So I also don't remember what time it was. But I was in the room and I was holding Kabir and I was feeding him and I was cleaning the room while feeding him. And a nurse walks in and she looks at me, she says, "You're not a first time mother." I'm like, no, I'm not.
But not just you're not a first time mother. I think you're also Zoya. Zoya has extra arms and legs, extra brains, extra everything. It's somewhere from a distance. But I want you to take me closer to that and maybe just describe what every day looks like for you, given you juggle multiple things at the same time. What's a typical day in the life of Zoya?
There is no typical day in the life. No, I'm not. My life is not
When does
dramatic.
it start? When does it start? Does it have a start and an end? Because clearly it doesn't have an end. I dragged you out of bed for this.
So I actually mean there's no typical day in the sense that I literally, since my kids were born, I have become one of those people that behaves like a kid. I wake up when my kids wake up. And sometimes I have my mother, like, she lives right next door. So I have her knocking on the door saying, "Okay, you know what? You have a meeting. You sent me your calendar last night. Are you not late for this?" I'm like, "Yeah, they can wait." I've kind of taken a very conscious decision that I want to allow my kids to not have that stress of, we need to wake up at this time, we need to do this, we need to, like, that rat race. They are eventually going to, maybe, if they choose to, join all of that. But until I have the luxury of not having them kind of in the middle of all of that, I just want them to be. And frankly, I think I'm enjoying it quite a bit. So
Absolutely.
I mean, I do, of course, I have all these jobs and all this work that I do. So I'm pretty busy, but I also am very, very lucky that I work with people that allow for me to be me, which means if I say can't do this at like 7 a.m. or I'm going to drop my kid at 11 a.m., like, they just get it. So I think that's one of my friends, Pius, recently told me I should stop saying this. So I'm going to say it and then delete it. That I'm privileged. And he told me,
I wish we could do that, no, in life, like we do on WhatsApp. Just speak something and then say, "Hang
Cross
on,
it out."
I need to edit what I just said." But now you've said it and it's on the record. You're privileged. But no, was it always like this? Were you always someone who couldn't sit idle? Also, I have to say something. You gave me permission to not work for a bit, in the sense I always knew that you were obviously this rock star and everything. Again, I've always been from a distance and a lot through Bias, our mutual friend. But I kind of knew that. And then you told me when you had room, you were like, "I'm just going to take a break. I need to focus on recovery and everything." And I was like, "Oh, if Zoya can do it, then I should also do it. Then I should also rest." And you won't realize how important it is to say this for other people who are under immense pressure to know, I have to go win that whatever best employee award, and I have to like also be there for my child. And then also, so I think you're not just privileged, you're also inspiring other people by doing these multiple things, but also knowing when to kind of switch off. So tell me about that.
No, I think this is a question I've been asked in other formats and ways where, like, people will ask me, "Okay, how do you balance things?" I'm like, "What's balance is shit."
Yeah.
Like, I don't try to
agree.
balance things, right? For me, I prioritize. And right now, it's my season of, like, enjoying my kids and enjoying looking at life through their eyes. I think that is the real privilege, that I have the ability to do that. And so I kind of look at everything through that lens. Like you mentioned earlier, I'm not on social media. The reason I'm not on social media is that, like, to me, it takes away from my time, like actually having conversations with my kids and being present with them. And so it doesn't mean I'm never going to be on social media. It just means I'm not going to do it until they are
So you're not
fully.
on you don't like go on Instagram and watch reels for 2 hours every night after your child sleeps next year? Aren't you just like watching reels and then after 2 hours going like,
I
what did
have
I
to
just do with my time?
I have to show you this. So because you have to see to believe it. Can you look at my phone? It's literally black and white. My phone is always black and white. I learned, you know this, that I read up a lot on. I want to be a good parent, and I want to be not just a good parent, and I want to keep growing as a human being. And right now, that human shows up most as a parent, but even beyond it. And so I keep looking at things. And the one thing that I noticed about myself when Rumi was about 1 is that I used to have this constant guilt where I would be feeding him or, playing with him, but I would constantly be distracted by this ting, ting, ting on my phone, or, like, even I remember, like, at the beginning when I was feeding him, because, when a baby's newborn, we all know this, it's 24/7. For a long time, I was like just on my phone in parallel. And I feel like I missed out on really, like, connecting with my child at critical phases because I was like distracted, and I wasn't even aware that I was distracted. So at some point, about a year in, I decided to get off like most social media, and I realized I couldn't. I was literally, this sounds ridiculous, but I was addicted. I couldn't like stop. I had to keep going back, and it's like I had a good excuse. Oh, you know what? There's that parenting question that I need Instagram for, or there's that whatever. Like, I would keep finding ways to go back. And then I did something insane. I told my brother, who he's younger than me, but in some ways wiser. I told him, I said, here's my Facebook password. Go change it and don't give it to me, even if like I beg or grovel, until I'm like 40 years old. And he's like, are you sure? I was 31 or 32, 32.
Wow.
He's like, 8 years. Are you sure? I was like, yes. And I gave it to him knowing that he's the one person in the world who will take this seriously. Like, he will even enjoy not giving it to me. I
Of
go to him
course.
back. So I did that. And for a few weeks, months even, I was like, I used to miss it, and I used to like want to keep going back. And I used to feel like this almost emptiness, like I'm not connected to my friends. I don't know who's where, what's happened. Like, there are 100 reasons that social media helps, right? And then I started feeling just calm and peace. And now now I actually actively, I'm one of those crazy people that don't have notifications. My phone is grayscale. I do go on LinkedIn, but only on my desktop, because I mean, I realize it's okay. Like, as long as I'm connected, I need it for work, but it's not something I do for like more than 15, 20 minutes a day. And that's it. I don't do anything else. And I'm happier.
Plays a role in being able to get things done, because I am addicted. I'm badly addicted. I need to stop. I follow all sorts of accounts, mostly like paparazzi videos of what Alia Bhatt wore to the airport. And I'm like, why did I just watch this reel? And why are they showing me more? You watch one, then they show you 20 others, and you watch. It's to stop. I do it after they fall asleep, and it's my way of decompressing, but it really isn't. You're so right. And I think if you don't have a sibling, find a friend, tell them to change your password and
I
get
can do
off
it, Anshul.
social media.
Send
I
me
know.
your password.
I don't even know my Facebook password. Facebook I don't use. Instagram is my problem. Shorts and reels, that dopamine hit thing, I have that problem. Talk to me about your relationship with Angad, your sibling. How
So Angad and
how
I
has it evolved?
Angad and I are 17 months apart. We're kind of like really siblings that like love each other to death, but also like are very like straight with each other. So he is the one, like, if you talk to him about me, you'll get a very different version of me than what everybody else will tell you. Like he's the one who'll tell you she's shit at navigation. She can't do math. She can't, like, he'll give you a list of things that I can't do, and he keeps me honest in some ways. We have a very, very almost not almost, it is an unconditional, fully unconditional relationship, to the extent that, because I don't think I mentioned this so far, but my parents are separated. So it was Angad, mom, and me. And so in some ways, we became very, like, we were a unit that was much closer than just two siblings are, because also there was this, I was kind of playing in my head the parent part to him, and he was doing whatever he was, all the psychology that messes us up, but also brings you closer, right? So I think we have a really, really interesting relationship. Also, because he's only 17 months younger than me, after some time, our friends became kind of the same. Like, for example, Pius, who I was just talking about, when he came to visit me recently, I took him to stay with Angad for a few days, and it's all my friends know Angad. All I know all of Angad's friends, so we kind of have a very actually, the separate story but related is that Lohit, when we were thinking of whether we should have a second child or not, read this 800-page book called Sibling Bond, and I didn't read it, but he read it, and so he told me something very fascinating, a number of very fascinating things. But one of the fascinating things is that the way to bring two kids together, like, the reason two siblings are close or not is primarily the role of the parents. And parents usually, when the one, like, main thing that determines whether siblings grow together or apart is if they had things in common or not. If they had the same hobbies, or, had the same friend group, were they in the same school, were they, like, doing things together. And Angad and I literally did. We are very different people. So in terms of hobbies, they were very different. Our friends were also different, but we were all also in part of each other's lives. Like, if his friends were coming over, I would be in the room, playing with them, and likewise. So yeah, I don't know if I fully encapsulated our relationship, but that's a
It's
flavor.
hard to do that, but it evolves over time is what I find fascinating. Like, when I have a pretty big age gap between me and my sister, and obviously when I was 1, she was 7. But when I was 23, she was 30, and that was a very different time in how we connected. And now, of course, we're like, sometimes I'm the wiser one. I'm just putting this in there, and then I'll send her just this part and be like, here's your reel. But most of the times she's the wiser one. And it evolves. And I think after both you and Angad are parents, so that has also probably changed. You mentioned growing up as a unit of just you, mom, and Angad. What was childhood like? Because I'll tell you a story that someone, a little birdie, told me that when you were very little, you desperately wanted to go to kindergarten, and you were fighting to go, and somehow your amazing mama managed to make it happen. And then there was a line that all the kids were standing in, and your cousin happened to be in the same kindergarten. And apparently somebody was pushing him out of the line, her or him out of the line, and you were at the back of the line. You came and you said, told the other kids, don't do this, put your cousin back in line, and went all the way to the back of the line. It's a trait in Zoya, fairness, equality, being kind of, I won't say right, but balanced. I know we said earlier that balance is not a theme, but I think it is. And the ability, just like you said, disconnecting from social media because you want to be a present mom in this phase of your life. Everybody wants to do that. Not everybody is able to overcome dopamine hits. So, like, childhood plays a role there, upbringing, your own parenting, in how your mom raised you and Angad. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think so. I had a number of different phases of childhood. There was the up to 8 years of age when my father was around. I have very few memories of that, like active memories, which is strange because at 8, like, you should remember a lot of things. I have, like, very drastic, dramatic memories of my parents separating and a few other things, and that's about it. So I've often wondered what that phase of my life, like, because we know this, the first 5 years of a child's development kind of set their whole life. So obviously there is gold there that I just can't access because my subconscious is protecting or whatever me. So I don't know. There are stories like you just shared that I've heard a lot about myself, and I guess that defines also my own identity, because the stories we learn about ourselves also, whether they are or not, they become who you are. So this is definitely one of them. But I think so that's phase one. Phase two was like after 8 to like I'd say 15, when I actually grew up in a joint family, because my mom and my brother and I moved to Ludhiana for 4 years, 8 to 13, actually 8 to 12, where my mother was living with her parents and her two sisters and their kids. Very strange for like an Indian context. Like it was three sisters living with their parents, and both, like my mother was separated, but both the other sisters had their husbands living there too, and all of us were living there. And it was like my grandparents only have daughters, so it was rather nice but also odd. But I grew up in this very matriarchal kind of world, even though there was clearly, my grandfather was clearly the man of the house and like everybody was scared of him. But other than him, there was like everybody else was a woman, right? Anyone who had a voice was, there were some men, but like everyone of consequence was a woman. So there was this whole, the lens of like I can do anything. I guess I just saw it happen around me. And my mother is definitely an epitome of that. But even the other women, like I could tell that you could do whatever you wanted. My grandmother, for example, was a principal when she was in school, when she was like younger, in the day and age when women didn't work. She was adopted, and she, despite all the odds, ensured that she, was able to work herself, but also get all her three daughters to be professionals and do whatever they wanted. Like those are the kind of stories I grew up watching and being around. And so I was always, to me, that okay, women are not equal was not a reality. Like it happens to other people, not to us. um so that's one big theme. And then I think I often, like, this is something I'm discovering only after I've had my own kids, but I grew up in this constant, what's the right word, like cacophony. Like there was always something going on. And whenever I was outside of that, like just chaos, I felt like like something is not good. Like this, what's going on, right? Like that silence almost felt deafening to me. And the chaos was not always happy chaos. It was just sometimes like fights, sometimes like drama, like whatever happens in joint families. But everything gave me like energy and just fun.
Sure.
So I think that's another big thing, which like I probably also the reason why I'm always on the go and I can't just be. Like being is so hard because I've grown up in that context where you're just doing things all the time, and it's
Yeah.
always fun.
Please, I want to see what you do on vacations. Like, because you also can't sit with a cup of coffee and open your phone and like, oh, it's all black and white. What do I do? What do I do? Everyone's having fun. Something that I heard recently was Tina Fey. I think the Amy Poehler and Tina Fey were having a conversation,
I
and
have no idea who these people are, so please
they
educate
are
me.
just people who
Okay.
talk. And obviously, as I have nothing better to do, I listen to them. And Tina Fey said, I'm a work based woman. She basically said, I don't know how to not work. I have to work. I'm like, if I were an animal, I'd be a carriage horse because I have to like keep going. And she said, I don't mean it in a way that, she said, I go to work, I come back, I spend time with the family, and then, I have homework to do. And she was very country, I have homework to do. But that's what the brain is for her. It's like, needs to do that to be a human being. You, in some ways, I feel are like that. When I was listening to that, I felt like maybe in some ways if you're not creating something, and you said also you're a writer. So I think what happens is when you're not doing what needs to be done, then you want to write and you want to create more. So just, I mean, it's not even, I don't even know what the question there is, but is that right? Is that how are you a work-based woman?
Actually, not. I think there is some truth there, but I would put it slightly differently, which is that the one thing I'm constantly obsessed about, and most people this would ring true when they hear this about me, but may not say this about me themselves, is that I'm genuinely obsessed about how people interact with each other and how they interact, like who they are. Like
Right.
I'm so curious about that I can, if we start having a conversation, I can stay up till 4 a.m. and wake up again at 7 a.m. and restart that conversation. And I'm not doing that out of like any obligation. I'm just like, that is where I feel most alive. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, this is what happened, or this is why you are reacting this way.
But
To
you're
me,
not very
that's,
social, right? You're not
yeah.
a very, right?
No.
So it is very interesting. Like you understand people really well. You understand relationships. You are very well connected. Like your network is, I have to also share this. I was trying to get an appointment with a surgeon who was booked out for 9 months. And somehow I got to speak to his office through Zoya. Now, don't ask how that happened, but it happened because Zoya knows the world. So how does that strange
Actually,
dichotomy of sorts exist?
so when you said I'm not very social, and I said immediately no, actually I am social, but I'm social in a very specific way. So I'm not, I get my energy from other humans. So I'm not the kind of person that, like, I'm not an introvert. I'm definitely an extrovert. But I think I'm an extrovert in a very, very nerdy way. Like in the sense that when I'm hanging out with others, I want to actually get meaning out of that engagement. Like I don't want to just go and party with people. Like, fine, I've done a bit of that, but I've done only a bit of that, not a lot. And whatever, it doesn't add to me. But like engaging in conversations and getting to know somebody deeply, or a group of people deeply, is what really moves me. So I think it depends how you define social. I think
Yeah.
from the way I look at it more as where do I get my energy from? And I certainly get my energy from groups of people. My husband often says this. He's like, you were in such a bad mood 5 minutes ago, and then these five people show up, and now you're suddenly like great and happy. I'm like, yeah, I don't know what happened. I'm just like, so yeah.
So 8 years, first 8 years of your life, you somewhere in your subconscious mind they exist. Was something, then Ludhiana, then back to Delhi and college, and found your way into a, let's just say, big tech giant. And that's where you met me.
Your recollection.
You very early on decided that the bin is not the place for me. See,
I mean,
you
why did they call?
you realize things first, and the rest of us just keep doing that silly thing. But yeah, you got out of the bin and you said, "No, I'm going to do something more meaningful with my life." And you just didn't do something meaningful. You built an entire company, and you about 1,000 employees. In fact, even got one out of that tech giant into yours. And so I kind of know of the journey through him again. And then one day he tells me, they've all left. They've gone to Canada. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, gone. So you now, please tell me how that happened. So, of course, we can go deep into like core and how that phase of your life and you were like boss lady, and I think all that exists in some ways, but this part of your life abroad outside of India have really fought through some of this immigration stuff on your own. I've been privy to that as well, and then of course are raising Rumi and Kabir outside of India. It's that like.
Yeah, I think when you say it like that, it seems remarkable. When I tell you how it happened and where we are today, it seems not remarkable alone, but also like kind of perfect. But so 2017, my cousin, so I told you for a period of my life, I grew up with two of my cousins and both my masis and their husbands. So one of the cousins, she moved to Canada with her husband, and she started what I can only call is an avalanche because within 3 years or less than 3 years, 15 of us had moved.
Wow.
And so it's kind of crazy. Most families don't do this, but our family is a bit crazy. My grandfather likes to say that Brars were originally nomads, and that I guess has stayed with us.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just literally one after the other said, oh, she's moved? Okay, like, why shouldn't I? And eventually, one after the other we came, and that made the decision almost like an obvious to me, because if my whole family is here, then what am I going to do back in India? Most people want to go back to India for family, and I'm like, no, right? That's I got that all here.
Yeah.
So that was in the background, but also in 2017, this was the year when you were not in Delhi in 2017, or were you?
Maybe.
Okay, but do you know
No,
this?
US. I'd moved to the Bay Area. Yeah.
So then you missed it, but
Mm.
you must have heard of it. This is the first year when air pollution became like
No.
a thing, and
I felt it in my throat often when I've gone back. And
so
yeah.
so Lohit and I sat down one evening at our house, and we said, if we are ever going to have kids, and we were not even like, he was not clear that he ever wanted to have kids, but it was like, if ever we want to do it, it's not going to be here. Like, this is a shithole. Like, honestly, that was kind of the way we were thinking about it. And I was this hotshot CEO who was traveling everywhere, but I would come back at 1 o'clock to Delhi International Airport from a business meeting and drive back home. That was a 20-minute drive, and I would be shit scared and on the phone with Lohit or my mom the whole time, saying, just so you know, I'm not dying on the way, right? Like, it sounds exaggerated, but it really is not. Like, that's exactly how life was every day, living there. And I just said, my whole family is kind of thinking of it, and why would I stay here? Of course, I had this whole company, and it was not easy decision to just say, okay, I'm going to, move on from it. But I think I was really, really lucky that the pandemic happened, because 2020, I was still running my business, and Lohit had already moved to Canada about 6 months before that. But we were kind of in this phase where I was traveling here 1 week a month, going back 3 weeks there, doing some business here, doing some business there. And like, there was no real plan for me to move in the near future. I came to visit him in 2020 in March, and then I got pregnant with Rumi. And then the borders shut down. Then I got pregnant, and then I thought, okay, I'm not sitting on a plane right now. Like, this is too scary. And I was supposed to go back eventually, but then, we all know what happened 1 month after another, and Rumi was there, and I was like, no, I'm definitely not going back. So I've literally not been back to India since then. And the flight I took from India to Canada was March 15th, and it was the last flight out of India to Canada. And I carried, it's hilarious, my mother and I both traveled from India to Canada, and you know what we carried in our bags? Old, really, really old, tattered shoes for my brother, because that was his last belongings. He had already moved to Canada, and he had said, just bring that last box for me. And like, you guys are anyways coming here every month, just carry that last box. And I carried maybe like 4 pairs of clothes, because I was supposed to go back in a week. That was the plan. We were like, okay, let's just go, and all of this is going to blow over, and we'll realize everybody's panicking for no reason. And then in a week, we'll be back. And we didn't go back. So
that's what he meant when he said, "Wo gaye." Oh, but so things haven't gotten any better. So I know you're going to India soon. Pollution's worse, traffic is worse, women's safety is the worst it's ever been. So things are bad. But that's what everybody who moves out of India apparently says, and speaks from a place of privilege. But no, it's the truth. They need to fix it, and if we don't say it enough, then maybe it won't get fixed. It's amazing that Lohit, who sounds like an extremely intelligent person, can read an 800-page novel. That for one is, that's making me think of a question. There is a real question here. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I heard a podcast that Michelle Obama now does with her brother, and she invited Barack Obama to it. And
that
there was
sounds
a
like
question.
fun.
There was a question about raising boys. And so both Michelle Obama's brother and Barack Obama were talking about how they were raised as boys. And Barack Obama, I just say Obama, said, President, am I supposed to say that? I don't know.
I have no idea.
Barack said that my mom was 18 when she had me. So the question was, a listener asked a question that raising boys, and getting them to be more in touch with their feelings and emotions, because we're raising really strong girls. How do we make sure our boys from the get-go have this sensitivity about them, and they're not always told, buddy, get up, strong, you're a good boy if you're a strong boy. That's how most boys, including our husbands to a large extent, were raised. Maybe our I'm just clubbing Rohit in. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
what I'm
no,
saying, but
same.
it's just how it is. 100% of men are generally raised like that. Till they know better, and some read books and find out, and some watch movies, and then they also have children, and they change as human beings overnight. So Obama said, because my mom was 18, she was so young herself, she used to talk about her feelings all the time. And so I thought it was pretty normal. And to say that I'm feeling sad or to cry. And whereas Michelle Obama's brother was like, I'm not that in sync. He's like a basketball coach and stuff. He's like, I was always told, be a man, be a man. Both of us have two little boys, and I know you read a lot of books on parenting and in general the psychology of human beings. What's your take on this? And I'm sure there are book recommendations that you have here as well.
Yeah, I think this is a topic where I kind of actually rely more on intuition than on books, because I'm pretty sure if I ask Lohit, you'll get a much better recommendation list than I'll give you, because he's the real reader amongst us. But in fact, if I dig up my chat, I can send you a few names.
Yeah.
He definitely has read books
Yeah.
on this topic. But I think for me, I'll tell you a story that might help make how I am bringing up my kids. I went to Costco today with my kids, and there was this really pretty pink dress, literally dress, with like a little whatever, that tutu or whatever at the bottom, and it was really cute with hearts on it. And Rumi looks at it and says, I want that. And I'm like, huh. Now, what am I supposed to say to this? Because he goes to school, and sometimes at school I'd reach, and he's, that they have costumes, and he'll be dressed like a girl, and I'm like, okay, whatever. But now that's one thing, to dress up like but for him to say, okay, I want to pick a dress that I'm going to wear and be so excited about it. And I was like, I looked at Lohit, and then we both just said, yeah, sure. And we bought it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know where he's going to wear it and what's going to happen next. But to me, I think it's my son is just a child I'm bringing up. It doesn't matter, girl, boy, like what. I want him to fully express, and like honestly, when I look at it from his lens, that pink is definitely prettier than the boring clothes that are there for boys. Like there's if we don't teach a boy that this is right and this is for you and this is not for you, if you just look at a child, most children like glitter, most children like rainbows, most children like unicorns, and that is just more on girls' clothes than it is on boys' clothes, right? So if he likes it, it makes sense he likes it. That doesn't mean anything more than that, unless I make it mean more than that and make him feel that it means more than that, right? So that's kind of like how I'm dealing with everything with them, where I'm just like, you just got to be who you want to be.
Right.
And if you can fully express yourself in every way, including how you feel and including who you want to be and how you want to present yourself to the world, then you'll be fine. So that's
Like when they cry, this is something I'm sure you also was like, it's okay to cry.
yeah, no, I bend over backwards and I tell them, I said, I don't just say it's okay. I tell them, great, you're crying. Like crying is good for you because it helps you let your emotions out, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Like
yeah, I think
yeah,
we are so crazy that I think we do it so much that now my little one, Samay, he actually says, I don't want to cry, I'm done. He can't say H, so he says, happy now. I was like, no, you can cry. So he's like, no. Then we get into a fight about how he should complete feeling what he's feeling. He's like, no, but I'm done. So I think there's a balance missing
Yeah.
in my life. I know that I've taken up more time than you have, and you should sleep, but I have so many other things that I needed to ask you. So I'm going to do and my anti-rapid fire. I'm going to quickly ask you some questions, because
Go for it.
one thing that I really want to touch on is the health part, which I know you recently fixed and are on this journey to become super duper fit. And that's always been something, even after Rumi, you were very, very um, good about your postpartum exercises and everything. And then, of course, when you get pregnant again, your body's again out of whack and you have to start all over again. So, what's happening these days? How are you? Talk about health stuff and talk about breastfeeding in the same, and sleep. I guess those three things, because they're all interconnected. There's a reason why sugar goes up and down. And so, yeah, that general bubble of health.
I think the most significant difference that's happened as far as health is concerned for me is that until before I had Rumi, and not, it doesn't have to do with motherhood, but like just self discovery before that, I used to always look at health as physical appearance, like as I need to look good. And I had this whole aversion to wanting to look good. I've said this in other contexts, but I went through sexual abuse when I was a child. And that I learned later on can have that impact on some people where you go like, okay, I'm not going to look good because looking good means attention you don't want. So you subconsciously kind of just almost look upon it as like it's a bad thing, right? To care about how you look. But somewhere this is the thing I learned about myself, and then I said, wait, okay, if that is why I'm not caring about how I look or how fit I am or how I'm like physically, then that's a ridiculous reason to not do it, right? So the moment I let that go, I kind of had a moment of, or many moments of, what does health mean to me, and who do I want to be physically in the world? And I think the most recent one was just a few months ago when I discovered I had pre-diabetes. Apparently 1 in 3 Americans have it. I don't know what the number is for Indians. It's probably the same. And most people don't care and they just live life like that. But for me, I was like, I know, because I'm from the healthcare world. I know what the consequences are with diabetes. I know, like, and being a mother, I think most mothers would say this, that you just feel this burden of wanting to live longer more than you would if you were not a mother. So I don't just want to live longer. I want to be healthy, fitter. Like I want to be able to play with my grandkids someday. Like it sounds insane, but it's true. Like that's, and for all of that to happen, I need to ensure that I'm healthy now, because a lot of these things as you age just become impossible to reverse, especially for women. It's like our bodies are just tougher on some of these things. And so it was a moment where I went like, okay, this is not who I'm going to be, and I need to like fix it. And my mother and I actually went on this journey together. She at about the same time she started having knee pain, and she was like, I don't want to be a 60-year-old who can't walk. Like, what's going on? So she started doing yoga. We changed literally every meal now is more protein, almost zero carbs, and it's not a fad, because we've been doing it now for 6 months and it's become our life. Like, we don't eat roti, we don't eat chawal, and we don't feel the need for it.
Do you substitute it with anything? Or
Yeah, like, I mean, I'm yes and no. Like, no.
quinoa or
No, like we just cut it out, because honestly, some people need roti chawal. I think I actually never needed it. My mother also actually never needed it. We were always like eating it because you grew up eating it, not because you actually crave it, or like craving anything is in your head, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
you can, if you choose you don't want it. The other thing that happened during my pregnancy with Kabir was that I actually had gestational diabetes, and so I wore a continuous glucose monitor. And I saw the effect of food on my sugar, and when I saw the effect of food on my sugar, I also saw the effect on my mood, on my energy level, on my sleep. Like, your whole body reacts a certain way. And then in 2022 I joined Ellie, which is one of the companies I work with right now, where we have built a saliva test at home for hormones, and it became even more acutely clear to me the impact of all of this. And I was like, if knowing everything that I know, if I still choose to do elsewise, it's stupid. So I took that. I took it on almost as a challenge, and I said, okay, so I'm not exercising because I don't have time, but I don't have time for anything, but I'm still choosing to do something. So I need a solution. So I bought a walking mat, and I do all my meetings walking. Like, any calls I do. This one I almost was going to walk, and then I thought, your audio quality, you're going to kill me. But yeah.
What's a walking mat?
Oh, you let me show.
I don't know what a walking.
You can't.
Oh,
Okay, you
oh,
can't see it, but it's like literally a treadmill under
oh.
the
So
desk.
okay. So you can. Have you been walking on the
No.
soil? Wow,
That's
this
I
is
I
freaky.
have not been walking
Huh.
because I thought the audio quality might get compromised. But
Ah,
otherwise,
okay.
I walk in almost every meeting, and I have
Nice.
found that to be an easy way to walk. Otherwise, um, like doing it as a separate activity just doesn't happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then like simple things like I just took away my chair, so I'm either standing or I'm walking, and that is much better than sitting. Water was a big thing. I would not drink enough water at all. Like I would not drink water on certain days. I was like, I would reach
Same.
the end of the day and not, right?
Yeah.
And so I bought like so many bottles, and I'm now acutely aware when I'm thirsty, I used to be eating because I couldn't tell the difference in my brain between this is thirst versus this is hunger. I can now tell it. So I mean, I park the car farther away at a grocery shop and I walk. Um, Things like that, which are everybody tells you those tricks, but you just have to make them a part of your life so you're not thinking about it or having to make that choice each time. You're just like, if I had to choose each time whether I should take away my chair and I would always sit. But the fact that my chair is there, it's almost like, okay, do I spend 2 minutes bringing that chair here? I'll just get on this walking mat. And now that I'm on this walking mat, I'll just switch it on. Right? It's almost like that's become the status quo. And I'm feeling so much better. Like I just have
Nice.
so much more energy. I'm sleeping better. Yeah.
How are you so self-aware, Zoya? You don't laugh. Seriously, I mean, not a lot of people do with the introspection and, just how do you know so much about yourself? Is that is it therapy? Is it talking to someone you confide in and are vulnerable around? Because you most of the time come across as just very self-assured and, but I'm sure there are many a moment of weakness and sadness
Yeah.
and just falling
For,
apart.
for sure. No, I'm human, so I have that. But I think I traced this back to like 8, 9 years of age when my parents were getting separated, and as a child, I had a choice on how I would react to that. Like honestly, both me and my brother, if you see us, we don't look like the typical people that come from broken homes. We seem like very sorted and like together, right? Um, but there was obviously an impact, and I think I what I learned in those moments was to kind of go inward and find ways to emerge beyond that. And I think I have done therapy, but I think therapy came much later. Like I did therapy when I was in my 30s. But even in my 20s, I was kind of like the therapist to most of my friends. I was a therapist. I used to often say this at core that my job is to be part pilot, part therapist. And if I do that well, I'll be the right CEO. And that's how I used to lead. There are people that will go back and say their life changed because of the time they worked at core, not just because of, work, but because of the choices they were able to make at home because of the conversations we had, for example. So I think it's not so much that I'm self-aware, but it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I'm genuinely self-obsessed, not self, or I'm obsessed about that human dynamic and how those things play out. And so I'm so acutely aware of those underlying things that I'm constantly watching for them in others, but I'm also watching for them in me. And I think I start by watching for them in me. So
And you're very
it's a journey.
honest, very honest about it, which I think helps. Last question for a slightly longer answer, then I'll promise it'll be faster. I don't even know if I can say molecules in mothers. So there's the hormonal testing work. There's what else? What else are you
So
doing?
I think Molecules and Mothers is at this point a passion project more than work. And I think most life's work is actually passion projects. So I see that like as a space where it eventually I might describe it as my life's work. But I don't know if we'll go there, but right now it's a passion project where Molecules is all the science. Yes, Google, but Google was kind of the aberration now in my journey. After that, it's been the last many years have been molecular diagnostics or diagnostics, at-home diagnostics, hormone diagnostics. Like that's kind of become the theme. Without choosing it, it became what I did. And so I became acutely aware of the impact. I used to say this back at Core that 3% of all healthcare spend is diagnostics, but 70% of all outcomes are the initial diagnostic. And that's kind of something that stayed with me. And I think that's really, really important work. And mothers, parenting is one of those examples of, not one of those, it is the example of a lever that impacts us more than anything else does. The first 5 years of a child's life and their relationship with their primary caregiver does determine everything. Like I was reading, I'm pretty sure you've heard of this, the ACE study, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences, where they studied, over many, many years, the impact of adverse childhood experiences. If you have 6 or more adverse childhood experiences, your life can get reduced by 20 plus years. Like, to me, that's mind-boggling. And there is nothing else that has that kind of impact. Yet, parenting is done as if it's a right, not something you earn or you learn or you educate yourselves on. It is done as a one-size-fits-all, in the sense that everybody parents differently, but there are these universal truths almost that exist in groups of people. Like, those universal truths are different, but if you ask a certain group of people, they'll tell you, "Haan, ye aise hi hota hai." Like, you know this. You are the one who taught me about baby led weaning versus spoon. Like, actually, that's where we became friends.
Yeah. True.
In my mind. But like, nobody else around me had even heard of baby led weaning, or was like, it wasn't a thing. And the moment you introduced it to me, I was like, yeah, this is right. But I did it intuitively. Does that mean it's right? I don't know. Right. So to me, that whole parenting is this black box where we are just doing what our parents taught us, or the opposite of what our parents taught us if we didn't like it, depending upon which way. And most people are not even making those choices, they're just doing it. If we could change one thing about the world, it should be how we parent. And so I'm trying to bring those two worlds together and build a more, I guess, science-based, evidence-based, thoughtful approach to how we parent, as opposed to just either doing it from intuition or doing it from somebody telling you XYZ.
Or Instagram. Learning from Instagram. Yeah.
I will not claim I know anything about that.
Yeah. Very quick. I want to let you go and you have to sleep. Anti-rapid fire. You don't have to think. Okay?
Let's do it.
One word each of these people I'm going to name are going to use when for you. Like, one word that would come to their mind if they were to describe you. Okay?
This is tough. Okay. Well, I'll say what comes to the top of my mind.
Rumi.
Mama.
Kabir.
Mama.
Your mama.
She would say
a quality that she.
I know you mean a quality.
Otherwise, you will say beti.
I have one word. That is so hard.
That's why I think it's not like it's late and you have to sleep.
I think she would say layered.
Layered. Interesting. Lohit.
I think he would say complex.
Complex. Layered, complex. Angad.
He'd say something stupid like crazy, or like something like that. He would, yeah. He'll probably say crazy.
Me, what would I say?
I should ask you.
No, just what do you think?
I think you would say, I don't want to say it, it sounds cliche, but I think you'd say some version of like strong-willed, but I don't know what.
Soul sister.
Oh, okay. I love that.
Okay, moving on from that. Dealing with labor technique, labor pain.
Oh, I was thinking like what HR,
random. Like random labor union? No, pain, tummy pain.
It was just the worst backache I've ever had with Rumi. And with Kabir, I took the epidural at the right time, and I didn't.
So labor dealing technique: take the epidural in time.
Don't. Oh no! I do have an advice there. Don't over stress about hypnobirthing and natural birthing and being connected with your kids and yourself and all of that is great. You can do it even with an epidural. So
Exactly. And read Zoya's blog post for more on how she eventually looked at everybody and they said, yes, just take it. And then she took it. When baby's sick, advice for that. I'm a complete mess, but both you and I have dealt with our fair share of babies being sick around us. We've been in the hospital with them. We've had to see them in situations that no parent, it's not easy for any parent, but I think for us, somehow I feel it's harder given just how much we don't want them to be in that situation. So just advice for that.
I become is that your child or mine? Who's crying?
It's probably not crying, just being
Okay.
child.
As
I
long
think
as mine
someone
is
has
not
woken
awake.
up. Someone has woken up. 3-4
Um,
more questions, including one on your nose pin, which is the last one. So jaldi.
So no, I think just I deal with it very practically. It's like what's needed, what has to be done, and I become that person who just needs to like have a to-do list about their
But
sickness.
there's something internally that
Arey,
is going on.
I
You
don't deal
say,
with that
"Shh,
kind.
delete
Other-
app."
because if I go into that, then my brain goes into what if they die? Like so I'm crazy. So I
Mine
don't.
too. Okay. Just don't deal with it. Do what you need to do. Get over it. They will get better. Shut up. Advice.
Exactly.
Advice to a mom who's nervous about giving birth. She's just like,
Arey,
I'm pregnant.
Giving
I'm-
birth is the easy part.
Oh no.
It's true.
That is true. That is so true. Try breastfeeding and weaning and feeding
And not
and
weaning.
sleeping and okay. Birth is easy. Meet the following years. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Final question about I don't know why this fascination with your nose pin, but tell me that story behind your nose pin.
It was a totally random thing. So I don't know if you noticed, but I have like this little till and then I have the nose pin. And so for the longest time I wanted a nose pin, but I always kept feeling like it would look odd with this because I'd like have like two things. And I was super conscious about it. Then one day Lohit told me that he thinks nose pins are sexy, and I'm like, my husband thinks that. And then my mom, I don't even know who started this conversation, whether it was her or it was me. But one of us said, oh, what do you think of a nose pin? And then like she said that she's always wanted one. And I was like, I was always wanted one. Let's just go get it. And so my mom and I both went together and got our
How
noses
cool
pierced.
is that? Do you have any tattoos?
No.
No,
I would
not-
not do that because I'm aware that you can get an allergy for life with that. So I'm
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Not same
paranoid.
here. I also don't think anything should be permanent.
Yeah.
That moles are okay.
and no, and with the nose pin, I know I can just take it out and
Yeah.
my skin will heal and it'll be gone. Like if I don't like it, I can get rid of it. So
Yeah.
I
All
don't want
right.
anything that permanent.
You are the best for staying up to do this. I asked you most of the things. If I could, I would just keep going on and on about. I did touch on so many things in terms of just going deeper. Like I would have loved to talk to you, which I will. Maybe there'll be a part 2 of this. Was just purely the body and what your body has endured with feeding, with birth, with what happens to the hair, what happens to the skin. So like more from a getting real and raw perspective, but this has been so nice that I was finally able to talk to you. I also want to do this when we're not recording, so I'm going to stop recording. Do you want to say anything before I stop recording? Say, oh,
No.
thank you for having me, and
No, I'm not.
it's not
going to
that
do
kind of
anything.
a conversation.